Ruslan.
All right, we are going to continue in our series through Luke. If you guys don't know, I have an entire playlist of a verse-by-verse Bible study going through the book of Luke, which sometimes doesn't get a lot of engagement and clicks because it's like, we want to tie it into relevant things. But on this specific topic, we're going to talk about how this sin of familiarity can completely corrupt and distort the power of God in our lives. What am I talking about? If you grew up Christian, if you grew up in the Bible Belt, if your family's a Christian, if you grew up in church, your perception of who Jesus is, how amazing Jesus is, can become normalized. It can become familiar. It can become watered down almost, where you miss the power of who Jesus is in the grand scheme of things. And it happened in the scriptures. In Luke chapter 4, verse 14, we're going to jump right back in. Jesus returned to Galilee in the power of the Spirit. So Jesus, this is after he goes fast for 40 days, 40 nights. This is after Satan puts him on this pedestal and gives him all, tries to tempt him. And then he comes back. He returns to Galilee in the power of the Spirit. And news about him spread through the whole countryside. He was teaching in their synagogues and everyone praised him. So he comes back, the news spreads, folks are fired up. It's so incredible. But he went to Nazareth, we had brought up, and on the Sabbath day, he went into the synagogue as was his custom. He stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. Unrolling it, he found the place where it was written. Now check this out. This is actually a really cool passage in terms of what Jesus said was some of his mission here on earth, and I would say some of our mission should be here on earth. Verse 18 says, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to" what? He's anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord. The year of the Lord's favor. Verse 20, then he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. The eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fastened on him. He began saying to them, today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing. Wow. Now look at verse 22. All spoke well of him and were amazed at the gracious words that came from his lips. So they spoke well of him, but then watch this. Isn't this Joseph's son? They asked. Jesus said to them, surely you will quote this Proverbs to me. Physician, heal yourself, and you tell me, do here in your hometown what you have heard that you did in Capernaum. Truly I tell you, he continued, no prophet is accepted in his hometown. Okay, another translation of that is a prophet is without honor in his hometown. I assure you that there were many widows in Israel in Elijah's time, when the sky was shut down for 3.5 years and there was a severe famine throughout the land. Yet Elijah was not sent to any of them, but to a widow in Zarephath in the region of Sidon. And there were many in Israel with leprosy in the time of Elijah the prophet. Yet not one of them was cleansed, only Naaman the Syrian. All the people in a synagogue were furious when they heard this. They got up, drove out of town, and took him to the brow of the hill on which the town was built in order to throw him off the cliff. But he walked right through the crowd and went on his own way. So Jesus comes back full of power, full of the Holy Spirit, the whole bit, and then starts preaching in his local synagogue. And the people say, aren't you Joseph's son? And he says to them, man, prophet is without honor in his hometown. Another version of this, and one of the other gospel talks about how he didn't do the same miracles in his own hometown. So oftentimes, if you grow up around the teachings of Jesus, if you grow up and he is like a distant family member almost, you grew up always hearing about him, it's normal, it's a part of your culture, it's a part of your vernacular. You've just always gone to church. Even when you were in the world, you still went to church. Even when you were living reckless, you still go to church on Sundays. The power and the goodness of how God can move in your life will become minimized, and you will fall into the sin of familiarity. You will fall into seeing Jesus and being distant from him, but still thinking you know everything there is to know about him, and it voids power that he can do. So those of you guys that were brought up in church, those of you guys that were brought up going to church. I wasn't, man. So part of me is like, man, I wish I had a mother that prayed for me. I wish that my mother loved Jesus. I wish that my family was Christian, right? I have a very tumultuous relationship with my mom till this day. But I also recognize that that comes with a different challenge. And that challenge could be this sin of familiarity. That challenge could be, you just kind of numb to it. It's just kind of like, you know, it's just Jesus. And you start viewing your faith as more cultural. You start viewing your faith more like your parents' faith. You start viewing your faith like, oh, I don't know, as if like you're not one of God's children, you're one of God's grandchildren, right? Like you're not really connected to the Father, but your parents are, but your family is, and you just kind of think you're just kind of in there through proxy. Here's the deal. God doesn't have any grandchildren. You're either one of his children or you're not. Okay? I don't care. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if your family is Christian. It doesn't matter if you grew up going to church. It doesn't matter if you know all the Bible verses. It doesn't matter if you do all the things. What matters is, do you know Jesus, and does Jesus know you? What matters is, are you in intimate relationship with Jesus? Because if you're not, you could be so close, but yet so far. You could be right up front, but much to like Jesus's family, they didn't believe until after. James, the brother of Jesus, didn't become converted until after Jesus rose from the grave, right? He was a skeptic. And imagine, I'm sure you think in hindsight, James wishes he would have had more time with his brother Jesus, but he was too close. In the natural, he was too close to him. It was just too normal. It was too familiar, right? And so we saw it in Jesus's in his own hometown. Prophet is without honor in his own hometown. And we can take this personally. I don't like to look at these verses and say, oh, well, you know, when we see Jesus, we could apply this to our lives. But with this one, you kind of can. God does something incredible in your life. God takes you from where you were at and transforms you, and you become a new person. Oftentimes, the hardest people to go back to and share that with are the people the closest to you. The toughest people to hear from you and receive your testimony are the people that are closest to you. A prophet is without honor in his hometown. The people closest to you, seldom can they see you because they're like, oh, that's just Stephen's daughter. Yeah, we know her. Yeah. It's just little Jeffrey. Yeah, he been running around here. Yeah, we know Jeffrey's right. And the more people are familiar with you, the less likely they are to see what God has done in your life and who he's making you into be and what is next for you. Right? So we got to be very careful. If you were brought up in the Christian home, you got to be careful that you don't get too familiar. You got to be careful that it doesn't become numb. Got to be careful that it's not just like, oh yeah, it's just what we do, right? No, where are you personally at? And furthermore, you also just got to know that, hey, sometimes the toughest people to reach, sometimes the toughest people to hear from, the truth from, are the people the closest to you. You ever share something with your family members and then they like hear someone else say it and they come back to you and be like, yeah, and they're like, I just told you that last week. We just talked about that. And they're like, I guess you did, huh? It's the sin of familiarity. Be careful, because it can creep in so easily and you don't even know it, that it's just sliding into the sin of familiarity, and you miss it. You miss the power of God. You miss what God could be doing right here, right now, because it's just a little too familiar. How do we get out of familiarity? How do we get out of familiarity? I think of a passage in Psalms where David is talking about, bring me the joy of my salvation and renew a right spirit in me, right? Revelation talks about the joy in your salvation, the youthfulness in your salvation. And so sometimes for me, having now walked with Jesus for a long time and been in ministry in a whole bit, sometimes it's refreshing to hear it in different contexts. Meaning that when the pandemic first broke out, one of the things that was really helpful, it was hearing the gospel in a different language. I speak Russian. So hearing the Bible taught in Russian was actually, it just like hit my brain different, right? Hearing the gospel taught from different camps that you don't really align with because of maybe some secondary issues, but you could still glean some wisdom from them. And I'm not saying go listen to false teachers, but that could be helpful. I'll be honest, for me, what was really refreshing was going and hearing different preachers speak in person. Also, when I attended the Sunday service thing by Kanye, hearing his pastor preach, Pastor Adam Tyson, who is not the type of pastor I would normally like listen to. He's very dry, he's very just yell the Bible verse at you. But there was something about him and about the way he presented it, as simple as it was, that it just kind of hit me different. You know what I mean? Like it just kind of hit me different. So I think the answer to that question is, how do we get rid of familiarity? Is to be willing to be uncomfortable and to hear and receive something in a different way, in a different medium than you're used to. So hopefully that helps.
Kingstream Entertainment, Ruslan.
Uplift despite the complicated things I felt. From cash aid to building generational wealth. Look, from her just hoping she can land a job, to owning businesses, not feeling yeah, I need some real estate next. I've been the realest, not best. Is there a difference? I guess, nah. Yeah, they told me God bless.